everybody. Welcome to the Daniel Davis Intelligence Brief, the Intel Brief. What we like to give you toward the end of every week. I know everybody doesn't get a chance to watch every show, and we don't want you to miss some of the more important things. So we go back and give you some of the highlights from some of the great shows that we've had this week, so you are up to date on all the things that are going on. But in today's Intel Brief, we actually have a lot of new things going on even today. One thing was breaking actually just before we came on air here, so we were able to grab it on there, and that is an update from the acting director of the Secret Service, Ronald Rowe, I think his name is, who was explaining some of the investigation that they have done into the Butler assassination attempt on Trump. This was not talking about the most recent one. We're waiting for that information still. But he had some interesting things to say, and we're going to talk about it on the other side. Watch this.
With respect to diligence, line of sight issues were acknowledged, but not properly mitigated. Issues were encountered the day of the visit with respect to line of sight concerns, but they were not escalated to supervisors. While some members of the advance team were very diligent, there was complacency on the part of others that led to a breach of security protocols. With respect to accountability, the Mission Assurance Review has identified deficiencies in the advanced planning and its implementation by Secret Service personnel. These employees will be held accountable, and this agency has among the most robust table of penalties in the entirety of the federal government. Again, I can't comment on this. This is a personnel matter that is still pending. What I will tell you is that I have not asked for anybody to retire. That was not, I know some of that was reported. That is false. And with respect to the disciplinary process, it will be handled in accordance with our table of penalties. That will be led by the Office of Integrity in coordination with our Office of Professional Responsibility.
Okay, he literally told us nothing we didn't already know. I mean, everything he said there was known just by watching the news or watching our channel, because we covered this quite extensively at the time that it happened. And the question that everybody wants to know the most of: what was the kid's motivation? What was the assassin's plan? Did he have help? Was there other shooters? Those are the things we actually care about. And none of those things were even addressed in this, this briefing. Now that he's had, plenty of time to do all this investigation. And the only things he tells us is that there were some mistakes made. Again, yeah, no kidding. And then also that he hasn't held anyone accountable, hadn't asked anyone to resign or et cetera. And, that's just a little odd, because he emphasized that, we have this table of penalties, very robust, and, there's going to be some serious censure, I guess, but no one's going to be fired. And I'm like, you know what? When you look at the U.S. military, let's say in the Navy, especially, a ship captain runs a ship aground, or he has some kind of an accident. They have a problem where they I don't know, hit a pier, anything like that, any kind of mishap on the sea. The captain's immediately retired and resigned. Resigned. It's fired from his job. Just no questions asked. The military, when you have failure tactically, people are fired from their jobs. And people all across the world in all different kinds of just regular businesses, if you make egregious failures, you're fired. Unless, of course, you're a general or something. Of course, we've talked about that, but that's a separate issue. That's a more political animal, so they don't face consequences here. But now then here, the former president of the United States, who's running for president, was only by the act of grace of God not assassinated. If he hadn't changed his head tilt at the last second, he would have been killed right on the spot there. And these egregious mistakes that he again acknowledged today existed, and no one's held accountable. And I don't mean just like, yes, you're going to pay a fine or something and keep your job. I mean, somebody needs to be held accountable for that and fired. I mean, we had, remember famously the former director of the Secret Service did resign under fire, under pressure. And okay, fair enough, that probably was warranted given the circumstances. But now then you're going to tell me that even the people who had the operational control and made the decisions, nobody's going to be fired? I just find that really eye-opening and problematic, because, how many times do you see people fired over silly stuff like they say the wrong thing, or they're not sufficiently sensitive to some topic or something? We fire those people left and right. But then when somebody does something actually where someone almost gets killed, and a former president of the United States nearly assassinated, and no one loses their job. That's just part of some of the weirdness that we have at the top of our government, I'm afraid. Lots of other things that also are going to fall into that category here, and we're going to see some of them. I guess really the next one in terms of responsibility. President Biden was asked earlier today about the ongoing situation, which we'll talk about in a little bit more detail in a minute, about these attacks coming from Israel against Hezbollah, against their leadership. These pager explosions, things have been going on now, huge airstrikes overnight throughout Lebanon at various targets throughout the depth of that what's about to be, or what effectively is, a battlefield. And Biden was asked what he's going to do now, and is there any hope for negotiated settlement? Watch this.
Northern Israel and southern Lebanon are able to go back to their homes and go back safely. And the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, our whole team is working in the intelligence community to try to get that done. We're going to keep at it till we get it done, but we've got a way to go.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. We're moving this way.
Is it realistic to get to a ceasefire deal, or have too many bad things happen that make it difficult?
If I ever said it's not realistic, we might as well leave. A lot of things don't look realistic until we get them done. We have to keep at it. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
So he's talking about, all of his assembled cabinet there. He's got the Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense flanking him on either side. And he just keeps talking about, well, we're trying to get this done. It's really hard. We're trying to get the hostages back. We're trying to get all the Israeli people to go back into the to their homes in the northern part of Israel, where they've been evacuated because of the back and forth bombs going between Israel and Hezbollah since October the 8th, et cetera. And what was reported, by the way, is also interesting about that meeting at all, is that's the first time in 11 months he's actually held a cabinet meeting. I mean, that's really saying something, that the president of the United States, the commander in chief, that's the first time he's actually had a cabinet meeting, at least what's been reported. And we're talking about all the, since October 7th, I guess, really, since that war started, and all the big things that have been going on, all these things that keep going on with the Russia-Ukraine war. And this is the first time he's even assembled his cabinet. Just seems a little odd, just kind of on the surface of it. But I guess that's not, more like par for the course, because what he's talking about there in our show earlier today, I won't play those clips for you now, but earlier today we had Matt Miller from the State Department and John Kirby from the White House talking about these things that Biden was about, this ceasefire and what's going to happen next. And in both of them, you just see the impotence of the United States. It was embarrassing, because we have no leverage over what Israel does. And I am going to show you one clip from the former Israeli Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett, who was on I think it was NBC News in U.S. Today. So that's what Biden's talking about, which is the same thing. It's hard and we're trying, but it's only hard because you aren't trying. Talking means nothing. If you tell Israel that this is as far as you can go and no further, and if you want to keep getting our support, you will do this, which American presidents have done many times in the past, by the way, not something that's unprecedented, but it is for this administration, because they will tell Netanyahu nothing except, what do you want? Oh, they may complain a little bit. They may say some stern things behind the scenes, apparently, but they don't take any actual action. And the kind of leverage that we have and we aren't using. Now, what he said there is contrasted by what the Israeli former prime minister has said, because he was asked on American television this morning, where is this going here? And is there still room for negotiation? So you just heard Biden say, well, negotiations are hard and we're just going to keep trying. And no, it's not impossible. But, well, the former prime minister was also asked about negotiations.
If you were prime minister right now, knowing what Nasrallah has now said, vowing to retaliate, claiming that all red lines have been crossed here, would you have given the order to Mossad to say, okay, carry something out like this inside of Lebanon? Or do you think this really does put Israel in a position where there could be a full-fledged war on the northern border?
Well, I have news. There already is a full-fledged war. Imagine the state of Florida being evacuated by all its people and having 8,000 rockets shot at Florida and Miami and everywhere there, killing children in Florida. That's exactly our situation. And we did nothing to Hezbollah. We've been restraining ourselves. And the attack tonight of the IDF on 1,000 rocket barrels, I think should be the beginning. But we need to hit Hezbollah, push him away from our border, and defend our people. If anything, this is way, way too late, attacking these rocket barrels tonight.
Okay, well, like him or hate him, and this is the case for a lot of Israeli leaders, they are very clear and very certain on what they want and what they're willing to do. And you see that Israel's taken all kinds of actions. But if you look at what they're saying and then what the words are, well, now you start to get back into the troubled territory again. And it was just oozing out of this interview right here, because he's making this case, and they do it all the time on American television, especially because they know that most Americans don't watch Daniel Davis Deep Dive, and they don't have a deep depth of understanding of all the things that are going on here. You do. And so when he says, basically, we're not doing anything, just we've been restrained, we've been holding ourselves back, and these darn Hezbollah dudes, man, they just have been, doing bad stuff, and we need to push them back to keep our people safe. On the surface of it, if you don't know anything else, that makes a lot of sense. But when you do know the facts, and you look at this chart that I'm showing you on the screen right here, this is from October 7th, when the terrorist attack took place, all the way through July 31st, this past July. So not any of the recent stuff here, but you see that even as of that time, Israel had fired 7,000 rockets. And by the way, those dots you see, all the blue dots, those are Israeli airstrikes or missile fires into Lebanon. And then the orange or the red ones dots, those are from Hezbollah into northern Israel. So there has been 1,500 from Hezbollah into Israel. Not a minor issue. That's a pretty large number. And why there's this big strip here where the Israeli people have been forced out of in the south, and there's a concurrent number of Lebanese people who have been forced out of the border on the northern side. Actually, further, there's more of them because Israel has more capability here. But when you hear the Bennett saying, we don't do anything, we've been restrained. Does this look restrained to you? It's nearly 7 times more rockets and missiles and airstrikes. Of course, Hezbollah doesn't have any airstrikes. All they're limited to is the missiles they have, whereas Israel has virtually no limitations on what they've been able to do. And of course, assassination attempts like the one that was in Beirut earlier today against a senior official, a senior commander on the Hezbollah side. They can do anything they want. No one rational would be able to claim that Israel's doing nothing and that they're showing restraint. There's no restraint in there. And they continue to assassinate all kinds of people in there. They've assassinated this guy today. They assassinated another commander about 2 months ago. They assassinated the leader of Hamas, their chief negotiator in Tehran. I'm sorry, in Tehran on July 31st. And there's a bunch more. They've assassinated lots of targets in Syria. They've attacked airports in Syria. I mean, they have done all kinds of things. Anybody with any kind of common sense would understand there is no restraint or very little restraint going on in Israel because they use violence left and right to get what they want. Problem is, they're not going to get what they want. Because the use of all this violence, all it's doing is stirring up more hatred for Israel and more anger. They're losing more and more support in the international community, which is almost restricted to just us. This is the person that was killed today in Beirut, and nobody in the West is going to shed any tears on him because he was part of the U.S. Embassy Beirut bombing back in 1983, apparently. So he's been around for a while, and I think it said right there was a $7 million bounty by the United States on him. So we've been hunting for quite a long time, and Israel finally took him out. But that's not the issue here. The issue is how is this going to affect the war? Because things have to go more than just personalities here. And while it's fine if you want to celebrate that guy finally being brought to justice, the bigger issue is this going to cause a war that's going to get America dragged into. And that is the real core of the problem with both the president, with Miller, Kirby et al., Secretary of Defense, Secretary of States. They're exhibiting no leadership at all. While you see the Bennett there, and there was another clip we showed earlier today of the UN ambassador for Israel to the United Nations. He's also very confident and very assured of what he's saying, and they actually do the things that they're talking about in terms of military operations, and that's part of the concern because they're very easy to use a lot of military power because they have it. And Hamas doesn't have it. Hezbollah doesn't have it. Lebanon, their armed forces, they don't have it either. And so there's no limitations there. The only limitation, the only potential limitation is the United States, and we're not applying any. Well, now the problem with all that is, of course, this could spawn a larger war. This could get us dragged in. This could draw in Iran potentially. We don't know how that's going to go, but if Israel does the next step, and as I said on a show earlier, I recommend you go watch it earlier where I did a lot of deep dive on this particular piece. There is ever real possibility that Israel is now going to do the last part of this, which is a physical incursion. You heard Bennett right there say that they need to push Hezbollah back from the border. That's only possible with a ground incursion. So all the evidence points to that coming. There's troops amassing on the border right now, Israeli troops. So that's probably coming here, which could draw us into a war. If the United States meant what Biden said, that we don't want a war and we don't want it to escalate, Kirby reiterated this again, then take action. Because right now he's not doing anything except talking to a camera about what he wished would happen and doing nothing behind the scenes with all of our flexible leverage, because without our bombs, without our missiles, without all kinds of other support that we give, especially diplomatic and political, this war is not going to happen. So we have some leverage. We'll see if it's going to use it. We haven't for 11 months. I doubt we will now, but we'll keep an eye on that for you. Okay, moving on to the next one. We had Ambassador Chaz Freeman on. He was talking about the Russia-Ukraine war and how this is really, really expensive in a way that you don't normally think about it.
Well, first of all, we had intelligence predictions, which were totally wrong, that the Russians would just walk over the Ukrainians. And then we had a moment of irrational exuberance on the part of the proponents of war. Oh, the Ukrainians are going to walk all over the Russians. That is not what has happened. And the casualties now are widely acknowledged in this war to have been over 1 million people. The majority of those are Ukrainians, the vast majority, because the Russian strategy in the war has been to stand back in a defensive mode and grind the attackers into bits, which they have largely done. They're now on the offensive, both in Kursk and in the Donbass, in a way that they were not for the previous 2 years of the war. So this is a change. But I think Mr. Lavrov is saying something very important, and that is that Russia believes, and there's a lot of evidence for this, that the West doesn't give a fig about Ukraine or Ukrainians. What it cares about is injuring Russia, cutting Russia down to size, perhaps engineering regime change in Russia, perhaps breaking Russia up into its component parts. This is an existential threat to Russia. And therefore, it justifies an extreme response.
So the casualty count total, Russian military, Ukrainian civilians, now Russian civilians actually as well. When you put all that together, it's well over 1 million, and it could be a lot more than 1 million. I've seen some estimates suggest that it could be as high as 2 million total, with a much, much higher casualty count on the Ukraine military side than anybody's willing to admit publicly. But whatever the number is, even the bottom one is somewhere around 1 million people. That is a shocking number when you stop to think about it. 1 million people in Europe are dead right now because the war continues on. And as I've told you, throughout this war, there is no military solution for it. And we've seen it play out graphically. We thought that Ukraine was going to drive Russia out in 2022, didn't work. And they said, well, let's have a big offensive in 2023, and then we'll push them out. And that utterly and completely failed. And now then, ever since that time, ever since late in the fall, or actually of 2023, Russia's been slowly on the offensive, now picking up steam in recent days. This Kursk offensive is nothing but a short-term diversion, which is already starting to shrink and be cut. I would show you the map there, but there is a new advance by the Russians kind of at the base of that incursion into Kursk. And right now it looks like they're starting to push across instead of starting from the top and moving down. It looks like they're basically trying to cut it like in the neck of the penetration. And if they continue on in that path, they'll either cut off all the troops in the north and then kill them all, or they'll have to surrender, or they'll all have to withdraw before the noose closes tight. So that's not going anywhere. And neither is the war if we keep going on. Zelensky is coming to the United States apparently in just a few days from now. He's going to talk with Biden. He's going to give him this victory plan. Everybody's been talking about this long-range missile stuff. They've been lobbying for it for a long time. You've seen, lots of people, a bunch of retired generals have been saying that Biden should give permission. You have defense secretaries from Britain and a former prime minister all saying, yes, give them. Apparently, everybody's waiting to see what Biden's going to say, because it all comes down to Biden, because he's not just the leader of the United States, but also the United States is the leader of NATO, and everyone's going to fall in line with whatever we do. And of course, there's real ramifications, because Russia's saying if you allow these long-range weapons to be used by Ukraine inside of Russia, especially if it's on a strategic importance targets, they said that that'll be the direct intervention of the West, because they can't be fired just with Ukrainians. They can only be fired with the direct aid of the West. And so they'll regard any strike in their territory as a direct intervention of the war, and then they'll take appropriate actions. And look, we keep on going down this war. And as Ambassador Freeman said there, the primary objective seems to be to, quote, hurt Russia. That's what we've said from the beginning. That's what Secretary of State Austin said in the war's first year. And this cost is just astronomical, because it's not anybody in Washington that's paying the price for this, or London or Paris or Brussels, any of these places. It's primarily in Ukraine. And I know that all these places are cheering for all of the casualty counts on the Russian side, whatever that number is. It's also really high, no matter what the true number is. It's for sure huge by any calculation. They're happy with that. They're cool with Russians being killed, but they seem to also be cool with Ukrainians dying in huge numbers. And that is really egregious. And I view it as immoral that the West is continuing supporting this war that any rational person can see can't militarily be won. It cannot. And now even Jack Keane inadvertently admitted that about a month ago when he was lobbying for this war to continue on. He says so that they can get a good negotiating position. So even he recognizes now that you're never going to drive Russia out to the 1991 borders. It's not even possible. But they're willing to continue the war because it, quote, hurts Russia. But in the process of doing that, the Ukrainian economy has been devastated. Their ability to generate electricity and now heat coming into the winter, as we're getting closer to the leaves are starting to fall already. The whole population is going to be suffering. And of course, there's hundreds of thousands of their men have been killed and wounded. Millions have been driven out of the country. The countryside is physically wrecked. All this farmland, which used to be so rich, much of it is shell-pocked. It's got unexploded ordnance in. It's going to be many, many years, probably decades, before they get the landmines pulled out. So they won't even be able to get back their production levels even after the war gets over for so many years into the future. It's hard to imagine. And the war's still not over. We're still talking about escalating further and risking a direct conflict with Russia, a war that cannot be won, but can escalate. It can go nuclear. And it's just egregious and just mind-boggling how we keep thinking that we'll never pay a price for this, and we're unconcerned if hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians do, as long as Russia's hurt in the process. Well, as I've told you also, Russia has been hurt. They have lost a large number of people, but their power has increased. They're not a weaker nation than they were before. They have been hurt, but they're now more powerful militarily and conventionally, and they're more powerful economically. And so they're about to have this big BRICS meeting where they're going to continue the process of trying to shift the balance of power in the world economically away from the G7 and the Western economies into something different with China and the Asia Pacific area, the so-called the other BRICS nations and into South America, Africa, etc. All really everywhere else in the world except the West. And we keep thinking that that's not going to happen, or it's not real. So we just don't worry about it. But everywhere you look, it is real. And we also had Doug McGregor come on earlier this week, and he expanded on this idea of the potential cost to us.
We should be concerned at this stage about the fragility of our own capabilities, Dan. What if we suddenly had to fight a real enemy, like a real capable opponent like the Russians or the Iranians or the Chinese? And there are others out there. I mean, I really grown tired and fatigued by this attitude in Washington that everyone outside of North America and Europe is somehow or another backward and incapable. This is not true. Capabilities that we monopolized 30, 40 years ago are now proliferating widely. So we need to get out of this mindset, but we don't seem to want to. And I think whoever ends up becoming the next president, whoever takes over, is going to find that not only have we spent ourselves into bankruptcy, but we've also exhausted our military capabilities to a very dangerously low level.
And specifically what he was referring to there was comments made by the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, who admitted that when it comes to long-range missiles, we have to basically take them from everywhere else in the world that we were supposed to send them through the sales process and give them all to the Ukraine because we don't have enough. And you had Secretary of State Austin about a week or so ago also admit, hey, when it comes to long-range missiles, there's not enough of them. And that means British and French as well. There's just not enough of them to make a difference. You can't actually have a long-range bombing campaign that could have a chance to change the war because we don't have the missiles ready. And when you just look at across the board, all kinds of categories of stuff, Stinger missiles, javelins, certainly artillery shells, we're cranking them out as fast as we can get them, but they're all going to Ukraine and they still aren't backfilling the stuff that we've lost. So even our own capacity is going down. And as Doug said, if we get sucked into a war in the Middle East, if we get sucked into a war against Russia, if we get sucked into a war against China in the Indo-Pacific, folks, we can't fight a war. We don't have enough capacity. We don't have enough manpower. We don't have enough ships. And we definitely don't have enough interceptor missiles to defend all of that stuff against the onslaught that we would face in nearly any one of those adversaries. So even if you didn't want to do the moral thing and end that war because of the cost to human beings, then you should just do it out of self-interested reasons that we're bleeding ourselves of military capacity. And we're dwindling our own defensive capabilities. We're weaker. Now, you talk about you wanted to make Russia weaker. You've made us weaker. That's the irony of it. And that's what makes me angry, because in this absurd and blind lust to do something bad to Russia, you're harming our national security while they're getting stronger. That's the absurdity of it. Yet that's where we are. And then to kind of end up the session here and from this week, we also had Matt Ho, who also talked on that topic.
How do they keep this war going? How do they continue this war? And so they put these things up there and they give this false hope. And for people who may not understand these types of things, it sounds good. It sounds like they got a plan. Oh, and it ties into this idea of tying the hands behind their back, this idea of stabbing in the back, this idea of betrayal. That's something that's really getting pushed in Washington, D.C. right now against the White House. And to Joe Biden's credit, he, at least this week, stood up against it and didn't authorize these strikes into Russia.
Yeah, but all he did is say, well, we're still taking it under advisement, maybe next week. So
that's, yeah,
we're still not out of the danger zone.
Yeah, was that delay? Is this just a delay to get the messaging synchronized so that it links up with Zelensky's victory announcements. So when he shows up hand in glove, we're announcing this as he's giving us the step-by-step process that they're going to win the war. The other thing too is nothing stopping McCall and others in the House from attaching a resolution or even an authorization in the continuing resolution to allow for these by U.S. law. I mean, is that the play that's going to happen next? I don't know. I mean, but like you could speculate how either Biden is in on it and he's willing to just delay this to make the plan better, make the messaging better, or there's going to be a fight over this and he's going to be under intense political pressure, and what's going to be hammered over and over again on CNN and MSNBC and the Washington Post is Biden losing his legacy. Is this going to be Biden's legacy, the man who lost Ukraine, right? And so for someone like him who is so tied up in his identity and who he is, his place in history, that may be a very powerful thing.
It certainly is a very powerful thing, and I just wanted to make a point here. I was watching some of the comments in the section here going on while he was on, and I thought this one here by Mike was really, really poignant. He said, "No, it's not just that the benefactor of all this is really that we push Russia into China's hands, and if things go up in the Middle East, China will benefit again." And yeah, couldn't agree with you more. That's been one of the lesser known reactions of this. So yes, it has made us weaker and has made Russia stronger, but it also has made our strategic position worse because it has pushed Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran all together working, if not hand in glove, something pretty close to it, as there actually is defense agreements between Russia and North Korea and Russia and Iran to our detriment. And of course, economically, Russia and China are working much, much closer. A lot of information that actually China has been helping militarily through covert means and through other kinds of dual use technology, et cetera. And I have no doubts that that's true. And so China would love to stay out of all the conflicts and just let everybody else burn while they pick up the pieces, of course. And now then the question is going to be, what is going to happen next week at the UN General Assembly? Because I think it's on the 24th that President Biden is due to speak, and on the 25th, Zelensky is due to speak. And we'll see what comes of all these discussions about this so-called victory plan that he plans on submitting. And he said it's got diplomatic, economic, military, and political dimensions. I think it's all just wishful thinking because there is no plan for victory. It doesn't exist. So whatever he's going to say is just going to be detached from reality. The question is, what are we going to do? Because they've said a lot of things that are detached from reality, and then we go down the path, and then we keep supporting it. But now that you're really, really in a dangerous time, because you've had President Putin a week ago said that if these long-range missiles are used, he'll consider that a direct engagement and then react appropriately, which he didn't specifically define. So we're not real sure exactly what he means, but it can't be good. And a lot of people think he's bluffing, that he's not meaning any of that. But Biden is going to be constrained on a number of cases because he doesn't want to. He doesn't want to get us into a war. He wants to try to find this sweet spot of where we can screw around a lot with Russia, but not get sucked into a war, which is a dumb thing to do because it's a slippery slope and you can't control a lot of these factors when they go in. And then on the other hand, he's constrained politically because the election's coming up. And if things go south with Russia, that could harm his protege, Kamala Harris, from getting elected just a handful of weeks from now. It's not even that far. It's hard to believe that November 5th is just around the corner practically. And so Biden doesn't want to do anything that's going to upset that. So I would be surprised if he comes out of this UN General Assembly and actually just overtly gives permission to do so. They'll probably have some kind of, you can count on it, they'll have some kind of flowery speech and they'll say, yes, we're helping Ukraine and they're going to continue to defend themselves and democracy, liberty, all kinds of buzzwords like that. But I doubt that he actually gives permission to use the long-range weapons, certainly not before November the 5th, because he wants to keep that on the back burner. He doesn't want it to spiral up. He doesn't want Israel to blow up. He didn't want anything to happen. I'm sure he wants to just keep the lid on all of it till at least after the election. Because if anything happens before the election, then it will cause lots of people in the United States to say, hey, hang on, President and the vice president this is their policies in both these cases. And if it blows up in our face, then of course then they'll blame her, and then it could at the last minute tip the election to the Republican. And that's what they want to avoid. So hopefully those political constraints will keep Biden from doing something really dumb and given permission to use these long-range weapons, even though he's coming under a lot of pressure, both among a lot of the retired generals. And there was a list of 100 foreign policy experts that said they're all behind what Kamala Harris was doing. You had the folks in the UK, 5 defense secretaries, former prime minister, urgently saying, yes, allow these long-range weapons, untie their hands, and all this kind of nonsense. Hopefully Biden will resist all of that pressure and won't get us sucked into a war. But as I've been telling you, the tactical situation on the ground continues to deteriorate for the Ukraine side. Nothing that Zelensky is going to get or do or say or anything else this next week in Washington is going to change any of those things. And the same thing remains to be acknowledge reality, end the bloodshed, end the pointless sacrifice, and end our strategic risk, and bring this war to the close on the best terms that we can get. That's where we should go. And we'll continue to watch it, because whatever he says next week, you can count on Daniel Davis Deep Dive to give you the real scoop. So when they say comments like you've seen him make in this earlier in this deal, I'm going to tell you what it really means. And we're going to keep on doing that because we are unintimidated and uncompromised to bring you the truth. We're going to continue to do it. Listen, now I want to remind people that we have a membership with our channel here, where you get special treatment, where you get we have this what we call a Daniel Davis Deep Dive Army Huddle, to where you get to exclusive access to us, where we actually engage with you back and forth in a live way. And we Gary always joins us. We do a lot of cool stuff. And we've seen that the Deep Dive Army grow. We're up over 100 now. And we invite you to join us as well. We're going to do one of these huddles next week. We'll give you information as that comes up. Also, remember, we are now on podcasting. So anywhere you get your podcast, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Podcast Addict, really anywhere, just type in Daniel Davis Deep Dive and you will find our podcast there. As always, please like and subscribe if you haven't already done that. That really helps us out more than you know. We appreciate you guys, and we will see you tomorrow on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.